So yeah, Paul Young, as introduced, for those of you who haven't yet met me, job title is Go-to-Market Director for SAP Go Cloud. History, quickly, is actually, for some reason, LinkedIn has decided to auto-generate a post this week that says, congratulate Paul on spending 1 year at Google Cloud. And so currently my email has been bombarded by people congratulating me. So I guess I've been 1 year and 3 days in role at Google. Before that, 20 years at SAP, 8 years at Hewlett-Packard, deploying, running their SAP infrastructure. So if you do math, that means I'm old, right? We've come a long way in 1 year, I'll tell you, at Google. So just to give you an example really quickly of where we are. The June last year at Next San Francisco, we announced that we'd have the 12 and the 18 terabytes VMs available. And it takes an act of God to pre-announce anything at Google, I have to tell you. In order to get that to work, we actually had to buy the hardware, install it, and make sure it ran, and would do everything we claimed it would before we were allowed to pre-announce it. And so it wasn't in our world, it was a pretty fixed event that we'd committed to launching these, and we were going to launch them because we already had the hardware. That said, as obviously Brad announced this morning in the keynote, the 12 and the 6 are available right now in early access to customers to become fully available this half. And so politely, I'll say promises made and promises kept. And at the time, I'll tell you, there was a lot of questioning on whether we were going to do this, because no one had produced a VM bigger than 4 terabytes at the time. There's a question whether it was even technically possible and what it would do. But we've delivered it. And we've delivered on a plan here with great intention, and a plan that continues on. And I want to just fill in some gaps really quickly here to explain why. We've been obsessed with being the only cloud provider that's doing full-on VM for our entire stack, because we believe it opens up huge potential for how you run SAP and how you can run that better, and how you can manage the sort of change that comes day to day with running SAP environments. Just to give you one quick example, Brad talked about this earlier as well in the environment, but we had a customer in the life sciences space who came to us and said, look, one of our big challenges is downtime, right? The law being what the law is right now, that if you're in the pharmaceutical business, you're in the medical device business, you fundamentally can't manufacture if SAP isn't online, right? You're required to record for pharmaceuticals the ingredients that were used, the recipe that was used, and if it's not online, you can't record that. If you're building pacemakers, you have to record the battery and who it came from and what batch it came from, so that in the event of a fault, we can trace everybody who has a pacemaker with that batch of batteries installed in it. And so literally, if SAP isn't running, then they have to shut down the entire company until it comes back up again. So the CIO basically said, look, we're a $10 billion a year manufacturer in the life sciences space, and every hour where SAP is down, it costs us $1 million. And the answer was, if you can do something about that, then that's something better, right? And again, coming back to why are we VM-based? Why do we care about VMs? We're VM-based and we care about it that much because one of the things we have is live migration, right? So what happens is, basically, that if we detect a patch needs to be put in for security purposes, instead of what everybody else on the planet does, which is send you an email saying you have 72 hours to shut down your systems and take a 3-hour outage while you patch your environment, which is $3 million in lost revenue you weren't planning for. What happens in our world is a brand new VM powers up at exactly the same size and shape of what you're running. It's pre-patched for security. And then we replicate the system across while it runs, the memory, the CPU state, the disk. And when we achieve sync, your original drops out and you continue onwards. And $3 million saved every time we do that for one customer, right? And up until now, nobody can do that. Right now, only we can do that. Only we can do it for anything over half a terabyte. We're going all the way up to 12, and that graph said 18, right? The bigger you get, the bigger the number is. And so that's, I think, the bit you first want to understand about where we're at in Google Cloud, right? Is we didn't enter this market saying, when I came on board, the conversation was, hey, if we just want to be a hosting provider for SAP, then let's just go buy a hosting company, right? We don't want to be a hosting provider. We want to be the best run environment for SAP. That's the first step of it. I'll give you a separate example of where we're at. One of the other things, again, what everybody else has to do right now is you have to take a 3-year commit to an SAP server. So you come through and you say, hey, I have my plan for SAP. From the beginning of time, what SAP says is, well, you need to go do a quick sizer, and you need to tell me what your busiest hour is going to be 3 years from now, and we're going to buy all of that equipment, and we're going to run it, and hopefully you've sized it correctly, but you're going to run all that equipment hoping you get your growth rates right, hoping you get your customer demand right, and everything else to where you need to be in 3 years. So I've done this conversation a lot with the retailers. My first question generally, I have to say, in the retail conferences is, does anyone know, and there's a risk here because I think there is someone in the audience who knows this, so don't answer it if you, but does anyone know what the best-selling toy was 3 years ago? So Christmas 2015. Anyone know what the number one selling toy was? No. I've done this a lot. Generally, people don't know. You can check me on this, but I believe the number one selling toy Christmas 2015 was an Elsa doll. And the fact that none of us have remembered that is indicative of how little we know about history, never mind the future, right? If anyone can tell me what the top selling toy is in 2022, then we're both in the wrong business, right? And given that you can't do that, the concept that you know how big your SAP system needs to be 3 years from now, and you can contract with me for that capacity is ludicrous, right? But it's what everybody else does, except us. Because we're virtual machine based. So what you don't buy from me is fixed machines. What you buy from me is capacity, right? And if you need more than that capacity 2 years from now, it's okay. You can just increase the capacity that you need, right? Likewise, what you're looking at here is a command where we're basically buying 15 terabytes of memory and committing it in Frankfurt. Let's say you need 12 terabytes, but you don't need 12 terabytes now, right? Right now, you've got a bunch of little dev boxes and everything else. So what you need right now is 24 half terabytes, great. Let's say tomorrow you need 6 1 terabytes and 3 2 terabytes, great. Let's say the day after you need 1 12 terabyte, great. You just restructure it as you need to. No one's done that flexibility before, right? So there's my very quick state of the union on where we are. We made a lot of promises last year to customers where we said, we're going to be different, we're going to have the best run environments. Politely, we've delivered. We delivered on time, and secondarily, politely, we've only just started. There's a lot more to come. But with that, I've always said in this space that SAP customers don't actually buy from salespeople. SAP customers buy from SAP customers. Generally, it's a very small but very active tribe, where when one does one and it's successful, everybody else will learn about it and will follow. So objective for the year was first of all, land customers, but secondary and politely, land customers of significance, right? So land the biggest customers we can handle. Because the challenge is you start small, and the average SAP customer will come along and say, well, yeah, they're in my industry, and yeah, they're in my country, but I'm bigger than them. Can you really work? There's always going to be skepticism. So the answer was, who are the biggest customers in our dreams? Who are the biggest customers we could possibly land that would prove to this business that we're serious, we're here, we do the enterprise, and we can do SAP at the largest scale possible? And one of my dream customers on that list was McKesson. And through good luck and good fortune, McKesson is a customer for SAP for Google Cloud at this point. So thank you for their business. But once again, I could tell you about this all afternoon. It doesn't really matter. Far more important and far better is for you to hear from a customer themselves. So I'd like to welcome on stage Meena Kishan Chandani and Andy Zitney from McKesson Technology.
Hey, Paul, that was almost a perfect pronunciation of my last name.
I've been dreading that one all day, I have to tell you. I was round the back rehearsing, but you can correct me you're coming back tomorrow for another event,
yeah,
so we'll
but no, that was almost perfect.
I get points for that one, apparently.
Yep.
So thanks. So both of you, thanks for giving us the time. Thanks for your business as always. Generally, these things, the tendency is to want to talk about technology, right? We're at a technology conference. Frankly, in this space, I believe this is as much about people as it is about technology. So let's make this a little more personal. Do you want to kind of give the audience a little background on your career path so far? What gets you to your current role at McKesson? Who are you?
You want to start? I'll start. So I'm Andy Zitney, CTO for McKesson. Background, a lot of financial industry, including PayPal. I see a PayPal contingent. So a lot of stuff learned from all of those episodes with PayPal, JP Morgan, Allstate. I think Allstate was, I don't know, a 70-year-old company, and I thought that wasn't old enough, so left there and joined a 180-year-old company. in the healthcare industry, and always sort of ran toward the fire. And I think in the healthcare industry, a lot of the change going on, not only with the industry itself, but also transformation in the technology side within that industry, gave me a burning platform to run toward, and decided to go see what I could do.
So Meena Kishan Chandani, and I have been with McKesson for coming up on almost 12 years. And before McKesson, I was with the utility company in the Midwest for a few years. So I joined McKesson as a database architect, having no background in SAP, and joined an SAP technology team. So very quickly, I kind of learned that, I need to, cross over at some point, because otherwise I'm just not going to make it double digits in the company. So I did that, and for a few years, I did more of a technical delivery, hands-on support, all of that for the SAP applications that we have at McKesson. In a few years, I kind of started leading the team, and on my journey at McKesson, then I've taken on also some data analytics responsibilities, and then most recently, I've kind of been I've been tasked with leading some of our ERP technology transformation workstream at McKesson. So that's my current role right now, and focused on that overall ERP transformation, as well as our cloud journey for those applications as well.
Cool. So let's start the baseline for the people in the audience who don't know McKesson. Let's just hit the background on what is McKesson.
So if you take a look at McKesson being, I mentioned, a 180-year-old plus company, it basically is centered around pharma distribution, about 80,000 employees in 14 countries or so. Depends on the time and how many acquisitions we're going through, how we'll answer that question. Also, it's about 210 billion in revenue. So when you're looking at the Fortune list, we're somewhere in that top 5 or 6 list. And if you think about from a distribution perspective, we handle 1 out of every 3 medical units of distribution in the United States. So anything in the hospital, whether it's a drug or med-surg device, we've touched it 1 out of every 3. And we're having a technical problem.
That's great. I'm going double-fisted on the slide controller. There you go. That'll work. Okay, can we go back to?
You hit the button.
And one more. Perfect.
Did I miss anything? Over 275,000 SKUs, as it says up on the slide. So this is really who we are. So when you think about from an SAP perspective and the landscape, you're looking at about 22 data centers globally. We may not be the largest SAP implementation, but what's out there and everybody keeps talking about is we're one of the highest transaction processing SAP environments in the world. But Meena will go into a lot more of this. It's a very complex environment because we've grown through acquisition. So it's not a single instance or anything nice and clean like that. It's a bunch of them sort of taped together.
I always think, I visited McKesson a few times with my SAP badge on before I came visiting with my Google badge on. The thing that always struck me is, I know we'll come back to this in Mina's conversation, but yeah, if you guys catch a cold, the world has a problem, basically. Fundamentally, when we started into this, it's funny, at Google they said, well, what do we need to know about McKesson? And my answer is, look, imagine your local hospital and you understand all the supplies, all the pharmaceuticals, all the bandages, all the saline bags, everything that's required every day, and then realize that they don't have warehouses attached to them, which they should, right? Well, they don't, because these guys are the warehouse, literally. You can place an order for any medical product, and 40 hours later, it will be delivered anywhere in America or throughout Europe, right? Literally, if something goes wrong, the world of healthcare has a problem. It's just amazing what you do and the scale you do it at. You're a critical part of the economy, ultimately.
It's critical infrastructure for the healthcare industry, right? And everything that we push down to distribution centers are cleared out within a couple of hours. So it's really like having the distribution centers online 24/7 around the country.
Yeah. So with that, I mean, healthcare is a fascinating industry to be in, but it's an industry that's changing really quickly, right?
Fascinating, that's a good word for it. It is a fascinating industry to be in right now because everything's changing. It's not unlike any other industry, but I think it's getting it from multiple fronts. You're having the disruptions from your I'll say your non-legacy players. Everybody thinks of Amazon and others. Entering in the space, thinking that it's regulatory and it was protected, that isn't such the case anymore. There's a lot of entries coming in. And then when you take a look at the government getting involved with the healthcare industry, and especially when you think about running in the EU or the UK region and some of the government involvement there and how they influence everything in healthcare. And then just pile on top of there the shift from what I'll say is the legacy healthcare experience that we have today, moving away from generic drugs and moving more towards specialty drugs that are really a drug manufactured particularly for you, your DNA, and trying to get that from the manufacturer basically into your body as fast as possible. That's a whole different distribution problem than what we solved for with the generics distribution.
So change comes every day. And so with that, I think one of the interesting things, Andy, is I know you've been on the conference tour a lot recently, so once again, thanks for your time here. But I know a year ago, in the conversations I was having with SAP customers and cloud customers in general, the theme was always lift and shift and lift and shift. And I'll tell you, so far this year, there's been very little conversation about lift and shift. There's this understanding at this point that running it here to running it there may be some economies, but ultimately, it's about the ability to handle change. It's about the next generation architecture, right? I know you have strong feelings about this, so how do you feel?
Yeah, this was really where sort of the architecture conversation came in and really where we got Google brought to the table in the dialogue. And the conversation for me was, how do we solve the ERP, right? For SAP, for us, everything else is going to follow. So whatever we do with that sort of sitting in the center, about 90% of our universe is going to follow that application suite, however we architect that solution. What this is really the target architecture. Basically what we said was, and my team takes offense to this, but below the value line, above the value line, right? We want to operate and deliver as much of that below the value line, so that's value to the customer, and just have that delivered. Pick a partner that has the culture that you want to fit your target culture for your organization and your company. Bring them to the table. They have the right solutions. You heard about the jumbo VMs, right? That was a major separation for us when we were looking for the partners because we knew we had to solve for that large SAP environment. It just wasn't a net new build fresh type of environment. You had to solve for the purchase packages. So what we looked at was really plowing everything into partners below the line, bring the right strategy and strategic partners to that below the line, and then allow our employees to operate above the line, right? So if you're thinking like GCP, setting S4 on GCP, that gives us an environment that we can then release some of our internal employees to be software engineers above the line to do things like data analytics on top of that platform. And that's our whole strategy. So as opposed to for the last 5 years, I think a lot of companies were just taking everything and saying, hey, let's run it in the cloud and we'll do the lift and shift. So they ran it and they ran it the same way. It was the same application, wasn't refactored, and it was sitting on really expensive infrastructure as a service architecture. That's not at all what we want to do. We want to refactor the applications and put in an architecture that allows us to add value above that line to the customer and not pay much attention to what's below.
Cool. And the $1/billion question in this case, because I'm sure there's a bunch of people sitting in this audience and beyond watching the replay as well, whose answer is, okay, that sounds like a great vision. I want to get there, and I want to get there isn't necessarily just sign a contract with GCP. It's also, persuading the executive tier in the company to want to buy into that vision too. How do you, I mean, you and me met to start this process last June at lunch at Next, right? In the 9 months since, just give us a highlight of what you had to go through to get to where we are now.
No, it's a bit of a perfect storm too. SAP, our current environment, when does it end of life?
2025.
2025 end of life. We also have JD Edwards in the environment. It's coming end of life too. So we have a perfect storm in and around what we're going to be touching. So the real selling point was we want to do this a lot different. So if we move toward this target architecture, you're going to be touching about 80% of your plant from an application suite perspective. You're going to be touching it anyway. So let's do this significantly different. The selling point of the why at that point became a conversation around enabling speed to value for the business. Because what they feel today is a very methodical, I'll say like enterprise release type of planning, where when they think of the product or the enhancement, it's 6, 9, 12 months before they can actually see it in the environment. We go to this architecture, and there's a lot more to this architecture than just GCP, right? The API architecture and everything else that enables it to move with speed. But once you have that in place, they can think about the enhancement and start putting it in within weeks, hopefully within days.
And this, by the way, the scope of what we're doing with McKesson isn't limited to SAP, right?
No, it's very holistic, right? It's an entire ecosystem.
Our ecosystem. It's a big ecosystem. Speaking of which, Mina, I know, again, when I spent my time with my SAP by John and McKesson, it's a high priority customer. There's very few bigger and very few more critical. But do you want to just give the audience an understanding of the sort of scope we're talking about?
Sure. I wish our actually ecosystem looked as clean and neat as it looks on the slide, to be honest. But it is a fairly large ecosystem, and we have, more than 25 plus products deployed already across multiple countries, including 13 countries in Europe and US and Canada. And we have an S4 implementation going on in UK as well, for which we'll be deploying, I think, 6 or even more products there. So when it comes to the number of environments we have almost 60 plus landscapes. I could not get a definite number because it's ever changing, as anybody who works with SAP knows, especially the technology team. And then 260 plus instances. So it is N plus one. For many landscapes, that's an N plus one landscape as well. And just in North America, one of our ECC systems that services our pharmaceutical distribution business unit, it's 100 plus terabytes. It's, so that's, if you think about the number of systems that are copies of production in the landscape, you're touching almost, just for that one landscape, it's close to at least, I would say, half a petabyte. And on top of that, you add secondary storage where we very proactively archive data, business data. So that's pretty huge as well. And then you add the multiple copies of backups and other kind of archives and all of that. It's a pretty large storage footprint just for that one instance. Yeah. So, and then that particular instance also is a very high volume transaction processing system, upwards of close to up to 2 million line items a day. So you can imagine the complexity involved to support that large of an environment as well. We are also a pretty mature HANA shop, I would say. We have multiple HANA deployments as well. We have a 24 terabyte BW on HANA environment. We have a 6 terabyte suite on HANA with a Vistex add-on environment, and a 4 terabyte BPC on HANA environment, and that's just naming some of them out there. So yeah, so we have a large talent pool that understands HANA pretty well, and so is kind of getting ramped up for the next generation of our ERP. Currently, as I mentioned, I think we have this our UK S4 implementation in flight, and it is actually started on GCP. And with all of that, I think we can safely say we are amongst the top 5. It changed, I guess. I think it's up on that scale of 1 to 5, but I think to be safe, I'll say it's top 5.
I think you're safely in top 5.
Yeah.
That's why I love you, because every day we deal with the question of, but who do you have that's bigger than me? And generally the answer, McKesson's going on GCP generally ends that conversation. There's not many people bigger than McKesson. I think the other point, just really quickly, when it says 2 million lines a day, it's the thing that was slightly fascinated me and terrified me about McKesson is it's a granular business. I mean, that order doesn't say, just go to the warehouse and grab a bottle of pharmaceuticals and ship it. It tells you the specific bottle of pharmaceuticals because it's all serialized. There's a huge amount of compute power involved in making those decisions and making healthcare traceable and correct, right?
Yeah, exactly. And these line items, I mean, it's actually bulk of it is processed in a 4 to 6 peak hour window.
Yep.
So when you talk about compute, I mean, you really have to design for that peak workload. And if you think about the, especially in the products in our specialty and plasma and biologic space, if you think about the absolute endpoint customer sitting there waiting for the product, I mean, you can imagine what kind of availability requirement we have, and also what kind of performance and throughput requirement we have here. And this is just one environment. So it's like, so it is pretty complex, I would say.
Yeah. So given that scope, clearly the answer isn't, hey, let's just run a migration tool and get it all over there by next Tuesday, right? You've got to structure this down. So the card in front of me says, what's the plan to eat the elephant, basically? But I mean, how do you plan to break this down? How do you plan to kind of structure this across?
So I think starting with a net new implementation that's going on in UK is the perfect start where we learn from that process and we are starting directly on the cloud itself. And some of our enterprise principles around keeping the ERP core clean and not building customizations in the ERP platform itself and building them as side-by-side extensions using GCP services and using some other technologies, cloud modern technologies. I think that's going to help us actually plan our North America kind of journey. Yeah. And because lifting and shifting of our current environment, I don't think we can even move this one landscape that I talked about to actually GCP itself. So that's the plan, that we learn from there, and then we take those learnings, bring them back, and incorporate them as part of our North America ERP transformation journey.
Yeah. So you and me were in Stuttgart along with a bunch of other Google and McKesson people, 4 weeks ago now?
Early March, first week of March.
Yep. You have a better memory than I do, apparently, on dates. So yeah, right about 4 or 5 weeks ago to get this all started. What have you learned so far?
A lot.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, so...
Well, I suppose it starts, because we did a set of work with you before in terms of testing reliability and failover and DR. Yeah. So it starts before Stuttgart 5 weeks ago, right?
Yeah. So I think our journey actually started with you guys late October, November last year. And the perfect, it was at the time the implementation in Europe that I'm talking about. They had to make some decisions around procuring hardware for that implementation. And also we had this evaluation going on for a primary cloud partner. So it was the perfect opportunity to bring that use case in and actually kick off a POC of sorts. I think that POC was about a 4 to 6 week POC where everything from soup to nuts, we kind of were able to stand up an S4 environment. At that point, we didn't even have any network connectivity with McKesson data centers. So from networking point onwards, I think and then there was about, I want to say about 15 to 20 technical operational criteria that we had put down. And they were pretty extensive, things like backups, restores, system copies, moving, scaling on the fly, live migration, and there's a bunch of others that we actually, made those as our success criteria. And from that point onwards, based on the successful outcome of that particular POC, we've then made those decisions that, our UK SAP implementation will start on GCP. And then we have had a workshop to enable the platform enough to get this implementation started. And then early March is where, the first week of March, we had a hackathon over there, where prior to the hackathon, we did a training for the teams there so that they could come in and actually be productive, as in actively participate and build things there. With the teams, I think your team was there, and then the PSO and the TAM. So there was a pretty wide representation from Google over there. And so within 3 days, we were able to stand up, I think, 4 SAP systems. We did also spend time on building some automation there, and not just manually kind of, deploying. So achieving all of that in 3 days, I think it's been phenomenal. And since then, those teams have been enabled enough to continue those deployments on their own.
Cool. So. I think Andy and me talked the week after, and Andy's assertion was, I think his exact words, I'll quote him almost exactly this, were, I don't know what Kool-Aid you gave them, but they certainly drank it. Yeah. So I'll take that response from a customer any day, Andy. But that's
well, like I said, this was the big hurdle. Talking internal to McKesson was getting the SAP, what I'll say is the heritage or legacy SAP contingents sold off or bought off on that we could actually do this, right? Because that wasn't an easy conversation when we started it internally a couple of years ago.
I think this is one of the challenges, right? SAP talent at this point is hard to find. A lot of it is retiring off. There's huge demand for it as we go through the S/4HANA upgrade. So part of the plan here has to be to kind of keep people engaged. So I think that's one of the questions we get a lot here, which is, people don't always react well to change, and this is change. And so can you make it change in a way that it actually engages people and carries it through? So, coming back to the hackathon, that sort of stuff, do you think, what can we do to keep people engaged and make this a project they want to work on?
I think it's just about the art of the possible, showing them that vision as to what's really possible, because they are even talent in the SAP space is also looking to really expand and become more cloud aware, and also kind of think of new solutions that you can augment and bring into the SAP environment itself. So to be able to, so the more we can enable them, the more we can help them show the vision. I think that would be actually really, that's the path to success.
It's fascinating because I had a conversation at actually lunch with another customer as well, and it's something you'd raised up to me before, which is, I think part of the challenge is people tend to benchmark what they do right now against what they'll do in the future, and part of the conversation is how can you get them to a point of, what's possible now, and then how they can go from there. And it's that moving people's kind of mindset to now instead of where they were. I think that's one of the things that fascinated me, I have to say, about Stuttgart is, we started showing some things, and very quickly the McKesson people elbowed us out of the way because they wanted to do it themselves, and they wanted to own it and take it over. And it was fascinating to me how quickly that happened in the room. Yep. And yeah, all credit to you, both of you and the whole exciting team, for the enthusiasm and the excitement I see at McKesson. Yep. Right? Is that fair in terms of the?
I think you guys delivering the engineers to the room, right, and getting the engineers sitting together and talking. Nothing against all the sales team that's here, but getting the engineers in the room and working together, they got excited themselves. And once you could see them start to think on the whiteboards and start walking through this, that became the art of the possible. And then later on there, a lot of the automation conversations that came in play. Right, I think that was a big differentiator when we were taking a look at the partner. Right, Google comes in with a software engineering mindset first, and not a lot of the others out there do.
Yeah, very cool. So one of my favorite questions, and Andy's least favorite question: 2, 3, 5 years from now, how do we measure success? How do we know we've been successful? You're going to say, Meena, can you answer that first?
I was going to say, Meena goes first.
So I think every year that success criteria is going to change. So I'm only thinking 1 year at a time at this time. So for me, over the next year, it's quantitative, qualitative. So if we can get our SAP Europe implementation, S4 implementation, the production deployed and working, and where there's great user experience both from IT and our business users, I think that's a huge, that's a number one in my opinion, because that is our opportunity to really sell, basically convince everybody else that this is going to work. I think the other thing is if we can drastically reduce our reliance on our external partners, including Google, where our people can do things on their own because they've really kind of ramped up. I think that's another one for me. And I think finally the third one is for North America, if we can move the dial forward and get some of our SAP cloud-ready type environments successfully migrated. I think for me, that's like, I'm just looking 1 year at a time because I don't even want to think about beyond that.
Okay.
I'll start with where I started last night, that I didn't get fired because of this, so that's where the bar sets. And then we go above that and say, a couple things. I think the customer experience has to change, right? This can't just be the exact same environment. So it has to be an environment that enables us to change the business process, enable business process change in a simplistic manner and at pace, and get the business to the table thinking a lot different than what we do today. And leveraging this environment and the capabilities within the environment that gives the business an opportunity to think differently on enhancements, as opposed to, I go back to the comment I made earlier, when you start thinking about an enhancement or a change or a customization, that's a long process today in the current environment. It'll be nice when they're sitting at the table and it's an easy conversation. It says, I would really like to just change this and do that in a different manner. Can we look at that? And we give them an environment where, yeah, we can, tell me that on a Monday and we can do it on a Friday. And they say, yeah, that's exactly what I want. And then we go live to production, right? So it's enabling the business to think much differently than what they do today in a huge environment and a much, hopefully, much more simplistic environment when we implement it. And then the last thing I'd say is, Mina mentioned keep the core whole. For us, that really means all customizations, well, a lot of the customizations, 90% of the customizations are done on our custom platform and not built into the core purchased application. That gives us massive change in the architecture that'll give us upgradability, sustainability to the core, and much less cost to maintain, and enable the business enhancements at our pace with our resources.
I think it's interesting, actually, that this change thing has started to come up with customers who've been with us for a while. Because again, in that VM-based world, historically, one of the dings against SAP is you can't change, right? And that, or not that you can't change, but that you have an idea, but it's got to fit into the change control mechanism, and so you've got to justify it, and it takes a while, and you tend to have to scale them up. And that ability to do small incremental change that would make a huge difference just isn't there on the platform. Right. But a lot of that is driven by hardware constraint, right? And we've seen this a couple of customers who said, look, I can just copy off a QA system. I can try out my concept. If I like it, it's good. I can have proved it and I can roll it in. And that ability to kind of unlock the capacity of the organization to change and innovate's fascinating, right? It opens up a potential in SAP that's not there. The other thing I'd just add in really quickly is when you're above the line, below the line discussion, for some of the customers that have been with us a while, there's one in particular where I chased the CIO down a show recently, where I said, yeah, I just want to check in that everything's going okay, right? Because I haven't heard from you. And his answer was, look, I've been live for 9 months and I've had 0 incidents where we've had to call Google Cloud. And he said, it's on the one hand, it's fantastic. On the other hand, I see a lot of my other salespeople because their system breaks, and I call them and shout at them, and then we talk about other stuff, right? He's like, I never have to call you to shout at you, so we never talk. And nice problem to have. However, it's fascinating because it's one of the things I think long-term we're going to have to chase through. As much as like the hackathon and everything is really good, where we're having to invest to get your people up to speed, I think ultimately, the conversation I've had with a bunch of other CIOs is, ultimately they want us to effectively be invisible, right? They want us to be a utility that's just there and works and is automated and it happens. And so I think we're still finding our way in terms of how do you engage with the customer, contribute, make them successful, but equally know when to back off and then leave them, with us in the utility space. Does that make sense? And you're above the line, below the line?
Yeah, and it's the whole dynamic of above and below that value line is that line was flat in that drawing. It's definitely not flat, right? So it goes across a bunch of business capabilities, and depending on the business capability is depending on where you want to draw that line in my mind. right? Because you could draw that line very low and say there is a lot above that line that adds value and it's a differentiator in the business. So let's have more money invested above that line. There's others that for core services, and I think SAP core services is one of those, there's a lot below that line. There's a ton below that line, and we would like to get that as to your point, as a commodity and just deliver it to the business. Then let them think of things like pricing engines and everything else above that line and put all their focus up there, as opposed to us talking to them about we have an upgrade coming and we have a patch coming, we're going to have an outage for it and everything else. They shouldn't have those conversations anymore. Right?
Yeah, for example, an upgrade today in one of the largest environment that I talked about, it takes anywhere between 9 to 12 to 18 months, and millions and millions of dollars of investment because of how complex it is and all of the stuff that we've built on top of it over the years.
Like I said earlier, stay tuned, but you're aware, we've got some other stuff. We're not done innovating yet. How about that for an answer? Of that, I shall say no more before PR mugs me. For both of you, I'd say we're a year on, we're effectively 9 months on. What do you know now that you wish you knew 9 months ago when you were starting this process?
So I think, I'm not sure about the 9 months, but I probably go back to the experience at least I've had or my team has had on working with cloud on some, even prior to those 9 months. So our journey, I'm sure at McKesson, cloud has been on for some years. And some of the SAP folks have been also trying to build some capabilities for at least a couple of years. So I'll go back to that reference point and not the 9 months reference point.
Cool.
So it has to be, obviously, it's a no-brainer that you have to kind of invest in your people because the traditional ways of thinking sometimes takes time to change. Then if you have to really kind of ramp up quickly to get some change going, I think you have to partner with the external expertise and experience as well while your staff is coming up. Talk to customers who have done this before. And then from a process perspective, I'd say really invest in automation. Assess what your team is spending their most time on doing manual tasks. Those are candidates for automation from day one. So definitely that should be your focus as you're thinking about moving to cloud. The other thing that comes to mind is challenge this 24/7 assumptions for some of your non-production environments, because it's not as if
Ourselves for a period, and I think there's also something to speed at the end of the day, because it does clean up your environment and you don't have to worry about all the integration points that you have today.
Yeah. It's fascinating because, again, if you define it as lift and shift, it's easy. It's just the stuff that's there, it's over there. It's just a SpongeBob meme, basically, right? The point where you realize that you can get additional value from it, it's a lot more thinking, right?
Yeah.
And it's not a technical problem anymore. It's not just hey, here's a tool and you can move it. There's a lot more. It's a project, right? It involves business people and changing people's lives and everything else. It's much more work. Last question says, well, again, 9 months ago, a group of people had lunch, and from here, that's where we started, not where you guys started. And now we're here. Equally, there's a bunch of people sitting in this audience who likely are here for the first time, having lunch and thinking about getting started. What would you tell them, other than enjoy lunch?
I would say, how do you get started is just that, go get started. I guess I'd answer it with a question. What's plan B? What's your other options? Right? Is it like for like and maintaining the same? And I think if that's your answer, you may want to rethink it because the business is going to look at it as more the same and slow down, and I think you'll have a different conversation with your business. You go to them with a strategy that is demonstrating and not necessarily that value line slide, but demonstrating that conversation that you really are trying to free up the company's resources to plow into the differentiating business processing above that line. And this is how we think we can do it and articulate it. I think it's a much better conversation, and they'll be more eager to get started.
Mina?
Yeah, I think I think most of what Andy said is what is what I'm thinking as well. Because like for like is really, there's no business case there, to be honest. At least if you're like McKesson or even close to it, it's just not going to work. So you have to be open to kind of re-architecting your, not just from a technology perspective, but also your kind of not quite culture, I would say, but how the messaging that goes from top down to the people and how you energize the base as well. Because that's I think one of the most important things, that if they're not bought in, then that's going to be tough to achieve.
Once again, thank you for your business. Thank you for your time. Sincerely, really do appreciate you taking the time for sharing your wisdom with everybody.